Welcome back to the Play-by-Play, sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where it is absolutely undeniably July. We have on today's episode a full year edition of our Torpedo Bat segment, our hot mics of the week, and more. I'm Brendan Kleen, staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. And that more that I just teased, Ben, is the long-awaited Brennan Caitlin Clark book arriving in our laps. I am laughing that it is July because we are stealing a segment from another podcast and just unabashedly going into, the dry part of the schedule. But it's a great opportunity to look back, so we will do that later. The book, though, Brennan, USA Today columnist, a long-teased, long-awaited, unauthorized biography of the biggest sensation in basketball on her game, Caitlin Clark and the revolution in women's sports. Unlike every other sports podcast and news show this week, Ben, we don't have an interview with Brennan, but we're going to just talk about her instead. Did we talk about the Dejanay Carrington, Caitlin Clark dust-up in the WNBA playoffs last year, where I think the Brennan hot button was pressed for the first time? Did we discuss that? I can't remember.
I don't recall discussing it. I feel like that's one I would have remembered. I don't remember having any lengthy conversations about this.
Yeah, me neither. So we've definitely covered it at Awful Announcing extensively. I think Brennan has kind of become a recognizable name for WNBA fans for sure, and maybe even casual sports fans once again. Of course, she's had an extensive and historic career, but she has been reporting this book in addition to covering Caitlin extensively for the USA Today. And that altercation, dust-up, whatever you want to call it, was in October of last year, where Caitlin's Fever were taking on the Connecticut Sun in the first round. And one of many of these little stories that has come up all the way through into this season, where Dejanay Carrington, kind of the enforcer, the defensive stopper of Connecticut, swatted a Caitlin shot and kind of ended up following through, smacking her in the face a little bit, and then cameras caught the Sun bench laughing, right? And we are going to get to now, but this is, I think, the kind of patient zero incident that leads us to where we are with this book coming out. And Brennan is covering that series and asks Carrington about the incident and the kind of social media response to it, the idea that the team was laughing, the idea that the hit was intentional. And Dejanay gives sort of a non-answer. I'm not talking about Caitlin, I think was what she said then. And then Brennan gets rung through the coals on, in women's sports media. Sarah Spain grills her about this on her iHeartMedia podcast. And basically, Brennan becomes persona non grata, I think, for a lot of mainstream WNBA fans who think of themselves apart from the new cavalcade of people that Caitlin has brought into the league, right? So that kind of sets the parties. Like, you're either Brennan, it gets sorted into pro Caitlin crazy. If you're not part of identifying that way, then you are against Brennan, and the coverage and the grouping and the perspectives have kind of carried on into today, where this book has come out, and Brennan has, for sure, I think, Ben, joined the chorus of voices who are criticizing the WNBA incredibly harshly for not being ready for Caitlin, not supporting Caitlin, not backing up Caitlin in all these different ways. And that appears to be the crux of this book that is a biography of Caitlin Clark, but really it seems to be an analysis of her arrival to women's sports and what it all means, the same conversations that a lot of people have been having. So we've covered a few of the excerpts, the interviews, and everything else. What have you made of her commentary in anticipation of this book, which comes out on Wednesday? Did I get everything? Was that too much, too little? Help me fill in the gaps here.
Well, I think at the core of it is that it is a very layered story, just in terms of Christine Brennan and her connection to Caitlin Clark through all of this. And like, I think if you take everything going on with Dejanay Carrington in and of itself, like I have a hard time faulting Christine Brennan. Now, granted, a lot of this storytelling has come from her perspective. And so obviously it is going to be a little friendlier to her than maybe a more neutral party. But like, it does seem like she was reporting on this incident that was getting mainstream coverage and reporting it in a way that you would expect somebody to cover it. And because there is sensitivity regarding Caitlin Clark within the WNBA, because they aren't typically used to, or before last season weren't used to this sort of mainstream coverage. I think it's totally understandable why there did wind up being some backlash to Christine Brennan. But I also think that all of that ignores the greater context, which is Christine Brennan has been viewed fairly or unfairly as an advocate for Caitlin Clark and as somebody who is I wouldn't say a voice for Caitlin Clark, but somebody who is definitely pro Caitlin Clark. And you get into just looking through our archive, like we have a story where she's speculating about the idea of Caitlin using all her sponsors to just create her own professional basketball league, like just total fan fiction. You look and eventually, I guess what it comes down to for me is like, yeah, I think the Dejanay Carrington stuff, I think that's totally or largely defensible from Christine Brennan's perspective. But I also think that when you become a part of the story as a journalist this many times and as frequently as Christine Brennan has, then I do think there's something there. And that is something worth examining from Christine Brennan's perspective.
Agreed. So to me, here's where I come down on. I think an example where she maybe first made herself the story was around the Olympics last year, which was one of the, I guess, hotter debates that actually mattered around Caitlin through the past couple of years since she became a pro, where there was this idea that even if reasonable minds could agree that when you see a Diana Taurasi or even a Jewel Lloyd, players like that in an Olympic roster not even getting minutes, that even if Caitlin would have been relegated to not getting minutes and not actually playing, she should have been awarded a spot on that Olympic roster because of the marketing opportunities, the attention opportunities that would have come from it. And Brennan made that a whole political position. I mean, not literally, but like a platform to run.
It was a rallying cry. Yeah.
Yeah. And she, since then, it has come out that she kind of got into a stalemate, like a real personal disagreement with the Olympic coach over all of that, as she tried to poke around on what was going on. That's Cheryl Reeve, who coaches the Minnesota Lynx in the WNBA. And that is an instance where I guess the ends I don't understand and don't seem to justify like the means of how she went about covering that story, right? It's like, what exactly did you want? What is the end game? What's the goal here? And it did appear to be kind of just personal, like her opinion, her view of how the league and the women's basketball industry should be run, just sort of becoming the central force of why she was talking and writing about things the way that she was. And I guess as a columnist, there's more leeway on it than a traditional, straightforward, WNBA national reporter for somewhere like ESPN, but it did feel odd at times. And so then that I do think that bled into the instance like the Dejanay Carrington story, where when you make it clear where you stand, I think it's understandable for a player. We saw other Sun players around Carrington give Brendon the cold shoulder, and that became news. Like, all these things kind of domino their way down from you make it clear. Be the same as if, Skip Bayless tried to go, hey, I'm just doing a book on the Eagles, no big deal. It's like, well, you cover the Cowboys, you know what I mean? Or something, you're known for being one and the same with the Cowboys. I'm sure there's a better example than that, but it felt that way. And so you kind of come into now, Ben, where I look at it and I think a lot of the excerpts, a lot of the interviews that she's been giving feel very similar to the Olympic thing last year, where it's sort of, what exactly are you wanting from this? What, other than it kind of feels like trolling the league. You know what I mean? And trolling the people around it. Where we wrote about today, I think on Tuesday, that she said, Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA, she pointed out a pattern where Engelbert often either doesn't directly name Caitlin Clark in conversations about growth and financials, or when she does, she will often list other players as well, almost as a forced, instinct. I don't think that's incorrect. You or I could watch a series of interviews with Kathy Engelbert and name the same pattern, but I don't feel a lot of productive chatter here. I don't feel a lot of solutions journalism, to use a J school term or whatever. I don't know what the point is, and it does. I feel like if I was a person in the league, if I was a player, if I was a coach, I would feel like, okay, so are you just simply pointing out that we didn't have the resources and the money and the staffing and the awareness and history to react to this properly? Because you might not be wrong, but it's kind of like, fuck you then. You know what I mean? Okay, you're right. So what, lady? You know what I mean? And I kind of think that's where we're at.
Well, and that's right. That's largely her thesis, is basically that this big media storm with Caitlin Clark was coming and the league wasn't prepared for it. And it's also totally understandable the league wasn't prepared for it, because this Caitlin Clark thing happened in the span of a year. It really felt like from her junior season March Madness run to, I mean, I know she had a following before that, but in terms of being a mainstream sports story, it felt like it was the second half of her junior season through the rest of her college career. And then she enters the WNBA. That's not a lot of time to get for a league that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure for that sort of mainstream attention. It's understandable that they would be caught off guard. And I also think the tricky part with everything involving Caitlin Clark is you have the race dynamic. You have just the dynamic of this player is infinitely more famous than our second most famous player. And but this isn't an issue that is unique to the WNBA. I've seen this covering college sports. It's how do you treat the star freshman coming in? How does Ohio State prop up Jeremiah Smith when they have all these seniors who felt like they've earned their spot? And then you just get to a point where it's yeah, Jeremiah Smith's the best player in the country. But it's there is this kind of awkward song and dance you have to do with it. And when I see Kathy Engelbert kind of dance around the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, I think we're getting a little bit closer to everybody just calling it for what it is, which is a phenomenon. But I guess I understand it would be awkward if she was just coming out and putting the entire weight of the league on this second year player's shoulders. I think that would be something we'd be writing about and we'd be covering too.
Agreed. And I the sensitivities to the over coverage, the perception that Caitlin's over covered, over focused on, the sensitivities from existing media, existing players, existing coaches, it is a whole, we could do a whole podcast just about that. I think, I think that it's understandable, and the trend lines were pointing up in much smaller ways prior to her arrival. I think you would say that around the women's bubble, the WNBA bubble in 2020, the political side of what they did there with the Atlanta or the Georgia Senate race and all those things got attention. And that maybe was where the uptick, you could say, started or whatever, but it's clearly exploded since then. And so how do you properly contextualize that? And I would say most reasonable minds would agree the explosion since then is almost entirely a result of her. The numbers are up in games she doesn't play, but mostly on a path that would have kind of just continued in a normal linear fashion dating back to 2020 when the bubble happened, but not exponential, not explosive, not something that could explain a 6x TV rights, multiplier. And so I guess there is a fine line that you sort of have to walk, but again, I'm not sure what use I don't think Christine Brennan is walking that line in a productive way when you say Kathy Engelbert should just say Caitlin Clark's name more.
Mm-hmm.
That's the answer here? That's the solution? Like, we haven't read the book. Like, we should say that. Maybe it's more productive in the book, but the part of it that I think might ultimately be productive that I guess I could speak a little bit on is the media side of it, the part of it that you and I actually cover and care about, and that this podcast, theoretically is about, where there is, I think you would have to say, the rules around media in the WNBA are more protective and more restrictive than other leagues. And that does appear to be backwards from what you would want at a point when the league feels like it's about to really take off and be profitable and be, the hot thing. It doesn't feel like those guardrails make sense when you think of it that way.
Let me ask you this, because you do cover the WNBA, like, how much media coverage are they getting on a nightly basis? Because there's a part of me that just wonders, like, if this is a matter of, like, Christine Brennan is just being singled out because she's one of the few national columnists or reporters or whatever that feels really devoted to this as their full-time job now. Like, how does the media coverage to the WNBA compare to the NBA on a nightly basis?
I think there's to answer the part you just said before I answer the real question. I think, like, it is true, right? Like, I think Brennan is kind of being clustered in with the argument that, like, the Cowherds, the Shannon Sharps, the Stephen A. Smiths kind of ran away with when she first entered the league, of everyone's jealous, this league doesn't know what's good for them, whatever. Whereas if Christine Brennan was the only one making it, it wouldn't be, I think, so heated. But it does pale in comparison, and I think that's the weird part of where the league is at right now. Is it is part of the national conversation where you and I are talking about it, and those debate show hosts that I just mentioned are talking about it consistently, especially Caitlin. But the day-to-day on-the-ground coverage of the league is still not really built up to drive that conversation in a productive way. And I do think that is part of why the conversations just go in circles and are effectively useless around her right now and around the league right now, because all that there is to talk about is the fight that goes viral, or like parsing the reading of the lips and the reading of the, facial gestures from her and Angel Reese when they play each other, or overlooking into a hard foul, because there isn't enough of the day-to-day coverage. I think the Fever are one team where there's more of it because they have a beat writer who has, been able to travel more often, and they have some independent people that do good work and everything. But, like, covering the Mercury here in Phoenix, who are, I think most people would agree, one of the legacy franchises of the league. They've always had a good attendance. They've always played in an NBA arena out here. They've won 3 finals. They've made 4. Taurasi is a face of the WNBA, and she played here for most of the history of the sport, of the league. It's very little. Like, we have one newspaper reporter. We recently started getting one TV reporter because the team is on local TV now, so that news station comes and covers the team, but they weren't before, and that's it. Like, there were many games where I would be there and there was less than 5 people total in the media section covering these games, and that hiring spree, that, like, buildup just hasn't happened in the same way that it has for the NBA, where I'm in overflow seating as a regular media member covering Suns games, and I've done that for 8 years and have a pretty significant, like, little niche covering the Suns. So I think that bleeds into where they have to accept lesser media, independent media, people who don't have experience. Those people ask stupid questions, insulting questions, bad questions, and then the players say, no, I'm not dealing with this. And then they retract, and their turtle shell comes out, and then you go and say, well, they're not ready for Caitlin, they're not getting covered enough, they're not ready for the limelight. where in that circle does this stop? I think is kind of the point where we're at now.
Yeah, it's funny because I covered a little bit of you did too, Sophie Cunningham repeatedly taking a shit on Cleveland and Detroit last week when they got announced for their expansion franchises, and just watching the clips from the press availabilities, it's still just like one or two people, and that's the Fever. That's Sophie Cunningham, who like might be one of the 5 most famous just mainstream WNBA players at this point in terms of her social media following. So I find that very fascinating. Real quick, going back to 2020, you mentioned the upward trajectory that women's basketball was on. I actually have a funny story about that, and maybe a hot take that I don't fully believe in that I want to launch. But I remember like March 2020, Mina Kimes had an episode of, this was when she was doing ESPN Daily, and she had a whole episode on Sabrina Ionescu, who I believe was in her senior season at that point. And, getting ready for March Madness. This is women's basketball's biggest star. This is the next big thing in women's basketball. And that episode of ESPN Daily got me so excited for Sabrina Ionescu. I went and checked out like her highlights. I was like looking at Oregon stuff on eBay, like all the stuff I do when I just become infatuated with an athlete.
Similar to your Maple Leaf shirt that you're actively wearing.
Exactly.
Right now.
This is for Austin Matthews. And then the next day COVID happens. And so it's just like, there's no NCAA tournament anymore. Like, we'll see you in 18 months, Sabrina. But my hot take that I've always wanted to launch was that me and my friend always had this joke that Justin Bieber stole Jesse McCartney's career. He was a young pop star. And my hot take was that Caitlin Clark stole Sabrina Ionescu's career. But I know that's not accurate because Sabrina's still awesome. But like, it feels like Sabrina could have gotten a lot of the buzz that Caitlin wound up getting had just like we not gone through an entire pandemic in 2020.
Had she had the tournament where they were the heavy favorites and won her title and had the highlight moments, and then gone into a regular WNBA season where she wasn't, on during the daytime with the bubble weirdness that we all saw. And then actually Sabrina got hurt that in the bubble and only played like 4 games, but
that's right.
Yeah, it's a good take. I think I've been interested why the Paige Beckers story hasn't really hit in the W. I mean, the wings are bad, and that's easy to point to, but I think that it's a different can of worms. But you want to talk about not being ready. That Dallas organization is in even worse shape than the Fever were, and that's part of what they're up against too. Is, oh crap, you mean we're like a big time sport now? And I don't care about the jealousy. That part of it is played out to me, but it's a fact that the business and media side was not ready for this. I just wish, and I hope that Brennan's reporting will be more productive there, and that maybe the media side is the more fixable part. You can't just snap your fingers and build arenas or, hire staff. But what you can do is take lessons from every other major league in the world and say, what's actually the best way to get the coverage that we want and not have it be as ridiculous as it's been. Let's get into it. Our overblown sports media stories of 2025. Shout out to Matthew Bellany and Lucas Shaw at the Town. We are borrowing their gimmick here, but we also have had it before, which is our torpedo bat segment, Ben, which is the story that blows up and then very quickly dissipates. Although in this case, I think some of ours are not really going to have dissipated. No. They're going to be things that have persisted for whatever reason that we think should not have. So we've got 6 full months of stories to dig through. We each brought 3, although I have some extras in case we overlap or we want to go to honorable mentions. But I'll let you start. What's your first overblown sports media story of 2025?
Well, real quick too, like it's going to be tough for us, I think, to get through this episode without sounding like hypocrites, because we've been responsible for some of the over coverage of some of these stories. But I do think like there is something feels like a big deal at the time, and you cover it like it's a big deal. And then you look back on it a month later or 3 months later or a year later, and you're like, oh, that really wasn't that big of a deal. Like that wasn't that big of a story. And so I think that's what we're trying to get at here. But yeah, I think it's going to be tough to get through this one without like having some egg on our face in one form or another. That being said, my first pick, and I feel like this is probably the most obvious one, although you might disagree, I'm going to say Stephen A. Smith's presidential aspirations.
I didn't even honestly think of that. For some reason, there was so much Stephen A. Smith potential options that I ended up going with none of them. But that's the perfect one to pick. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and we had Brandon Contes on, and we debated this one back when it was more in the heat of the moment. But now that we have some distance from it, like that momentum has totally slowed down. I think for me, I don't know if you saw his appearance on The Daily Show, but that really for me just kind of crystallized like, oh, this isn't a guy who actually wants to run for president. This is a guy who wants to go on TV shows and talk about running for president and have appeal to, but he basically wants to first takeify politics is what I took away from his appearance on The Daily Show a couple
What's
of
funny
months.
Is he kind of already did.
Right.
They already changed TV across every genre, and that wasn't enough for him.
Yeah. And so I just think like when you look into our archives and you look at how many stories we wrote about Stephen A. Smith potentially running for president, and then you realize like it wound up being like a, nothing that lasted past June 2025. Like, yeah, I think we probably overcovered that one in retrospect.
Counterpoint, we picked up the baton from actual pollsters who were doing this. Now I know polling is just content in 2025. Mm-hmm. It's not like, James Carville was out there going door to door asking people about it, but like it was real at the beginning. It was getting attention separate from even the sports world far before we all kind of ran with it. But yeah, it probably was a ploy to just grow the awareness of him as a political figure broadly. And his goal was to channel that into becoming a commentator more than a politician. Mm-hmm. But I think even him becoming that is still worthy of coverage, to be honest with you. So maybe we overdid it of the potential that he was going to be in the White House, but he clearly fancies himself a mover and shaker in that space. And in my personal opinion, like it actually could have some interesting effects, namely the fact that he may show his ass a little bit in terms of what that's actually going to look like if you pay attention to the conversations he's chosen to have and how he's had them, right? The people that he's bringing on, giving fairly uncontentious interviews to pretty radical people that are unpopular in the country to the general public, like the ICE director and Candace Owens and others like that. I mean, it's kind of been come one, come all in a way that I'm not sure is going to work out for him in the long run. And he is popular, so it could contribute to the general discourse around people like that and general kind of political conversation. So I think it matters, but maybe just, hey, he's not gonna be the president.
Yeah, I mean he's ESPN's. If he's not their biggest star, he's in the top 2 or 3. And so, like, if you, as a sports media website, if you get to the point where this guy is openly talking about running for president, like, yeah, we kind of have to cover it. I just think it wound up ultimately not being a story that mattered as much down the line as it felt like it mattered. And I also think like you could even say now heading into July here, like in Trump's second term, like everybody's still figuring out what the hell is going on. You have Dave Portnoy criticizing Donald Trump early on. You have, like you said, Stephen A. Smith having Candace Owens. Like everybody's just still kind of finding their footing around all this stuff and how they talk about it compared to Trump's first term. That like, yeah, it makes total sense. Like a story like this would have emerged as one of the dominant stories of the first half of 2025.
I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about the differences between what Stephen A. has finally just admitted in various articles he wants to be, which is Joe Rogan, and actual Joe Rogan, and why Joe Rogan is much better at this, I think, despite the criticisms that he's earned, than Stephen A. appears to be. But it's early on. Rogan's been doing this for a while. Stephen A. is just dipping his toes in a real way. Michael Jordan joins NBC. That's my first one. And I didn't really order them, so I know this might not be the most consequential, but we'll just stick with the big names at the top here. I don't think he's going to appear that much. I don't think he's going to say anything of substance, and I think it was just a nice PR boost for NBC to be able to say that he will be attached as they return to broadcasting the NBA after whatever it is, 20 plus years apart. What would you put? Help me peg the line, the over under of total Michael Jordan appearances from October through May of the first season that NBC broadcast the NBA again. How many times do we see him on air?
I'll say 6. I'll say about 1 a month.
I think that feels right. And how many notable things will he say within that? 1? Maybe 1?
Less than 6. It will be less than 2 or 3 probably. I agree. This is a great one. I'm jealous I didn't think of this one because I feel the exact same way. I think like just this idea that like I think some people have it in their head like Michael Jordan might be calling games. I know there's no inclination that that's actually the case. And all the reporting has like been like he doesn't even have a title. Like this is a very limited role. These are probably going to be taped appearances. I think probably the biggest red flag, if you even want to call it that, because I think NBC's been pretty upfront about what this is going to be, is that the announcement came at their upfronts, which is just where you want to make that sort of splashy headline. It very much felt like a throw-in. I mean, that's Fox announced Tom Brady 2 years before he actually joined the booth at their upfronts. This is just, you want to make those splashes. You want to rev up those ad sales and all of that. So I agree. This has been, it's again, something we're going to write about because it's Michael Jordan and it's NBC and there's a lot of excitement around that. But like in terms of what it's actually going to bear out by the end of this year, probably not a lot.
One person for whom it was not overblown was Brad Doherty, who appears to have potentially landed a job by way of his relationship to Michael Jordan as one of the analysts in the rotation for NBC, a job that no one would have ever guessed he would have been in the running for on a national level prior to all of that playing out. So salute to Brad Doherty. He benefited big time, but I'm not sure if the audience will. What is your number 2?
I'm actually a big Brad Doherty fan. I think he does a nice job on the Cavs games. Just want to put that out there.
I respect it too. I've seen him, I've heard him, but was he going to be on our if we did a draft of who was going to get hired as an analyst for the national gigs, would he have been in the mix there? I'm not sure.
You want to talk about undercovered stories? Brad Doherty's slow takeover for Austin Carr as the Cavs chief TV analyst. That was an interesting thing to see happen in real time here in Cleveland. But I digress. This one's vague, and maybe we should have Drew Lerner on for this one. But I think we need to stop talking about TV ratings in the traditional sense.
I had this on my list. I had NBA ratings and then in parentheses TV ratings in general ? Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't. There's no TV ratings are not like how anybody evaluates anything who actually works in the industry. I know it is like a nice press release and it is something you can take a victory lap on, but like you see some of these TV deals, including the NBA's, like the ratings are not, I'd like to see that chart because it doesn't feel like the chart says the higher your ratings are, the higher your payday is. I can think of a couple of examples where like entities, AEW Wrestling, like had pretty disappointing ratings and wind up doubling their own TV deals because that's not what broadcasters are paying for anymore. And so I also think when you factor in streaming and how many people are watching streaming, and June was the first month where more people watched streaming than watched, broadcast television. Like, I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know is like, we are not getting accurate measurements on any of these ratings in terms of how many people are actually watching these things. And so like, I don't know what the solution is. And that's where we need Drew Lerner's input. But it's just one of those things where it feels like we still cover it because that's the way we've always done things. And I'm talking about the industry at large, not just us, but that is not really reflective or has any connection to the way that these media companies and these sports leagues actually operate anymore.
It feels like it's hard to even imagine what the metric is going to be because So I just opened. I've been planning to write a piece on this. It's the title of the doc is Post Ratings, and I have like 100 notes on this. Like, I think that you kind of there's this. Have you heard of the Reel app?
No.
Then okay.
No.
So it's this thing that I noticed has kind of become this meme, and not like a funny meme, but just like a recurring thing online where people will often post screenshots, especially younger sports fans on Twitter, of like box scores, game scores, whatever. And it's like this live chat game tracking app. I don't have it. I should before I discuss it, I suppose. But they posted this graphic about a month ago where they track the number of people who click into a game on their app. And I was like obsessed with the idea that was like the new ratings, like in a way, right? One version of it. And they posted this graphic where, according to their tracking, only 11,000 more people viewed the Super Bowl on their app than Game 1 of the NBA Finals. And obviously, I'm not trying to make the case that the Game 1 of the NBA Finals was even close in the level of attention or awareness to the Super Bowl. It was a shitty Super Bowl, but even I wouldn't try to do that. But it like speaks to all these ways that people are engaging with sports in less trackable ways that makes it impossible. And I know like watching sports is the most monetizable thing. So it kind of doesn't matter that people were on the Reel app, except for like the ad department, the sales department at the Reel app. But like the sales department at the Reel app is one of the people monetizing sports now. Whereas like in 1962, it was only CBS and the game on CBS that you could even make that case for. And yeah, I could go on, but like I think the ways that people are going to monetize this, like you watch the Pat McAfee show as a perfect example. The cutout ads, the banner ads, these new ways that people are like making money off of things is just very different. And that market is kind of being set right now, right? Yeah. Where like whatever it costs per second for a Super Bowl ad is like this, we know that language. We don't know the language of like, what is Home Depot going to receive, charge, whatever from Pat McAfee to put a little circle around his box for 23 minutes on his show while he's interviewing so-and-so. I don't know. I'm sure there is a money changing hands and somebody knows, but it's not Nielsen. So yeah. I think this is a great one.
Yeah, WWE actually just went through this too. They started putting Slim Jim ads on their tables. Like when somebody goes through a table, now there's a giant Slim Jim ad on it. And they just had this big viral angle with John Cena and CM Punk where CM Punk went through a table and he's sitting there in the ring through this broken table with the big Slim Jim ad staring right into the camera. And like people were speculating that was a part of the endorsement deal, was like the Slim Jim ad that had, and so it's like, sure. Yeah, product placement's nothing new, but like, that's how like these revenue streams are really getting diversified here. And I think just like I said, like, I don't think ratings are as big a part of the equation as they were even 6 months ago, it seems like.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like you say product placement isn't really new. I agree with you, but it does feel like there's some kind of, maybe we're just remembering the value of it, or it's just becoming a little bit more enmeshed with like the environment of the thing, so it doesn't feel so awkward, like some 80s movie when somebody goes a Coke and then it's not so egregious, I guess.
Well, I also think like there's always this idea of like, again, I'll go back to WWE touts, and you can say this for the NFL too. NFL touts, we get X billion impressions on Twitter each day. And it's like, okay, well, what's the value of that? Like, okay, yeah, you have a lot of Twitter followers. Well, the value is like, if you want to do a product placement like WWE did with Slim Jim, that's where it will live. That's where people will see it. Like, you don't have to look at the ratings and see, oh, we drew a 20.1 and a 1.6 in the key demo. It's like, no, we have this many impressions. And if you do something with us, we're going to put it on our Twitter page, and that's how many impressions it's going to generate. So it makes sense that, like, now that we have all these ways, like, of evaluating interest in a league, like, now it makes sense that a league would look to monetize it.
The example that I had in my notes that I mentioned was Miranda Cosgrove eating a chicken Big Mac on Kai Cenat's Twitch subathon last year. Was like really well covered in like Adweek type publications because it was so innovative or whatever. But that is exactly what we're talking about. I mean, honestly, as with a lot of things, I think a lot of it can be traced back to Barstool. They've been on the product placement to the max forever, and they were ahead of things. Okay. I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the MLB ESPN split.
Okay.
And it might seem like that is properly covered because it is big news. You know, baseball tonight and Sunday Night Baseball, those were big time household name sports things that fans loved for years and years. Baseball was part of how ESPN built itself to be what it is. It's America's pastime, on down the line. But I actually just don't think it really is the story around baseball media. Like, I think at the end of the day, we're talking about 2 years. It was an early opt-out. Obviously, it spelled doom for the potential of a future relationship, or so we thought at the time, where coming up on the new negotiations, if they just opted out, of course, you wouldn't think they're going to strike a new deal, although that has changed since, which contributes to my point that it was overcovered because now they're talking again. But really, like, it overshadows the bigger conversation around baseball media, which is that they are really banking a lot, including like Rob Manfred postponing his retirement, the whole salary cap structure of the sport, all these things on what happens next with local TV. And that's the thing that is going to matter, I think, for baseball long term, because they probably weren't going to get $550 million on the next deal for the ESPN-sized package, which was pretty small. That was probably always going to slim down in some kind of way or go to streaming and just be overpriced for a company that can actually afford to pay it. But the bigger thing that matters for baseball is the local, and I think we're going to see that going forward, and that is part of, apparently, the renewed conversations that these two sides are having, Ben. So I just think they don't talk about us on First Take anymore.
Yeah.
And wild card games aren't worth this much. It muddied the water of like the bigger thing where baseball is kind of banking a lot of its future, and it wasn't ESPN.
Yeah, it oddly felt undercovered leading up to it when they opted out in February, I think it was, because it did kind of come out of nowhere. And usually, like with those things, like you kind of have a heads up that this could be coming. And I know there had been reporting about this, but like I didn't see a lot of speculation about whether or not ESPN would ultimately opt out of the deal. But I agree, and I had this on my consideration list as well. It's one of those things where the biggest story for baseball is 2028, and whatever happens between now and then is just a bridge to get there. And especially if a portion of this package, which is kind of how it seems like it's going, winds up going to ESPN, then it's like, oh, this was really overblown, because again, this is all just setting it up for what the real deal is going to look like when all the national rights are up. And when I actually think probably an undercovered story, is whether or not MLB, like, how many of its local rights it can obtain, because obviously it's gotten like the Guardians and some of the smaller market teams, but could it get the Dodgers? Could it get the Yankees? Could it get the Mets? Probably not, but you know, I don't know, that seems to be their end game. So I agree. I don't think like, and it is one of those stories. It felt very, very big at the time, because you don't typically see this, especially the way it came with ESPN not only opting out, but then MLB returning fire in that leaked memo to The Athletic. And so it felt really big at the time.
Both sides being pretty public about their disdain for each other. Manfred's giving press conferences. Like, it was front and center more than we're used to, for sure.
Yeah. And so that's especially the way it has played out. I agree. This there was a part where I was trying to like tell myself it was being undercovered, but when you look at the way that it's played out, like I don't think you could say it's been anything but overcovered.
What's your last one?
I'm going to play a hit here because I feel like we just talked about this one a few weeks ago, but I feel strongly about it. This would probably be my first pick, and it's the idea that ESPN is going to damage inside the NBA. I really feel strongly that ESPN is going to leave inside the NBA alone. I think the closest thing we have to a one-of-one comparison is Pat McAfee, and by and large, they have left Pat McAfee alone. I think to maybe a surprising degree. Obviously, there are other factors at play, including that, this is a prestige piece of the ESPN portfolio in the NBA. And you do have the constraints of just TV in general and how they're going to work around that. But I kind of roll my eyes now every time I hear like Charles Barkley or Shaquille O'Neal make a joke about getting fired by ESPN or pissing off their bosses at ESPN, because like, that is not the way that this setup is currently structured. Maybe exactly. It will get there.
They don't even work for ESPN.
Exactly. And so maybe we'll get there eventually. But to me, like all of that talk is almost like a convenient crutch for inside the NBA to either
Similar
point fingers.
Similar to Pat, right?
Yeah.
It's the enemy. It's the corporate overlords to make content out of.
Yeah. And that's, we saw that was something like Dan Le Batard benefited from when he was at ESPN, was he could always point to the bosses and how he was rebelling against them. And then you leave and it's like, okay, it's a little bit different product here. So I think it's been a convenient crutch. I haven't seen anything I could point to that would say that ESPN is going to overstep its boundaries with inside the NBA. And I also think for a very good reason, it's a property that they value. And so that to me has just been a overblown storyline in an overcovered story in 2025.
I like it. I'll go with one last one, which is, well, I'll throw an honorable mention out there, but I didn't think it actually was big enough ever to be qualifying as overcovered. Dan Orlovsky's free agency, mostly on his own behalf. I just didn't. It's funny to see it finalized, and it's like Orlovsky's role will consist of, and then it's just exactly the list of things he does right now at exactly the same place that he's going to do it. Okay, thank you.
We've also had two separate stories, like 2 weeks apart, about him re-signing with ESPN, right? So yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
I don't know either. I think he was in a pretty good spot to cover the NFL, and he will continue to be. Salute to Dan Orlovsky. Hopefully got a raise. Venue sports is my last one. Another one that I think it toes the line of, wait, was it actually undercovered or was it overcovered? Here's why I will say that it was overcovered. One, I think that it was a little bit of a panic move on the part. So this was the joint venture from Disney, Warner Brothers, and Fox to bundle their sports rights. We never really fully got an understanding of if that was going to be content as well as games or what it was going to exactly look like, but at least games. And, I think the price point was higher than people thought, and, the rollout was slow and whatever. And then Fubo sues them and they win, and they get an injunction, and then eventually basically they have to break apart the company and crawl back to their homes. And then that pretty much led to, ESPN just going all in on this new subscription service that it's going to launch and whatever. Why I say that it was overcovered is that I feel like it was a little bit of a panic move in the first place, Ben, where I don't think that was going to be the future here anyway. I think that where we're headed is a situation where there's platforms that basically become a version of cable that's just clicking around on an app instead of scrolling through a guide on your box. And it's going to be, there's going to be some houses for that stuff, and there's going to be some distributors for that stuff, or some rights holders that give content to those distributors. And so this bundle never really felt like the future as much as it was cast out to be anyway. It never had enough sports rights to really be an all-in-one like they wanted it to. And pretty quickly hereafter, you've seen what I think the more reasonable future is going to be, where Fubo is now in business with Disney. They're striking deals with places like DirecTV and Charter that allow people to add some of these subscription and streaming services to their cable package, where those traditional cable companies are becoming some of these places, the platforms that people are going to bounce around on. And ultimately places I think more logically like Prime Video and YouTube that are going to be homes to content from other companies, or maybe Disney Plus, where they're basically combining ESPN and Hulu and all their stuff together on their platform. I think that's what it's going to look like, not these 3 random companies charge you an arm and a leg to get some content, but not enough. Like that just, it was doomed from the start, I think, even as a business proposition. And the future was actually headed in a different direction. So I think the coverage of that got out of hand.
Yeah, it very much felt like a fool's Russian type of move. If I have my timeline right, it was first announced in like February 2024, which came right after Peacock had that NFL playoff game. And so like, I don't know if there was some sort of reaction to like the inroads NBC was making with streaming and what was going on with Amazon and everything there. But it just, I never understood who it served. Like I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank recently. And the big question on Shark Tank is like, what problem does this solve? I never understood what problem that solved, like putting those 3 specific entities together
for $43 a month. I didn't say it exactly because I didn't remember it. $43 a month, which is, nobody pays that much for anything to watch right now.
Yeah. And so it's just, I never understood what it served. I agree with you on where this is likely heading. And that's like, I think when this did all fall apart, like, I don't know. I didn't get the sense there were like, especially from ESPN, that there were a lot of hurt feelings from their side about it. And so like, I think that kind of shows that if ESPN was willing to just walk away and instead of fighting it with all of the resources and leverage that it has as a major cable entity, then I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know about like what their actual intentions were, which are pretty undefined here.
Yeah, there is. I mean, like I said, it feels a little crazy to say, oh, this big milestone in the evolution of like, live content distribution was like overcovered, but it was just not a meaningful inflection point. It wasn't the one to point to. I don't even know if we're there yet. I don't know if the deal that actually is going to really be the future is actually here yet, but it definitely wasn't that. And I think it remains to be seen because none of the big players have actually sold their content to somebody else, licensed it to a different type of Those are the things that I think are going to be more important. Like if Fox had actually put its content onto the ESPN standalone service, that would be pretty meaningful to me as a symbol of what's to come. But this was kind of a mishmash. Any honorable mentions for you before we go to our hot mics?
One I wrestled with, and this is kind of in the vein of my Inside the NBA take, was the Pat McAfee ESPN friction involving Adam Schefter. Because like, again, with Pat, it's kind of layered. Like the game day stuff is him as an ESPN employee or an ESPN talent, but his own show is like his own show. And so like, I get it. It's weird that he wants to have Ian Rappaport on instead of Adam Schefter, but like ultimately, like, that's his decision. That's just kind of the way Pat flies. But I landed on that one being properly covered. I think everybody was a little restrained.
I think that one was. So. I think that one was news.
Yeah,
but we do think alike. So this was on my head list. I didn't even have it written, but like, I think I could easily just say the Andrew Marchand column on Pat was a little overdone, in my personal opinion, where it took these strange, unrelated instances and then kind of packaged them together with the Schefter thing. Mm-hmm. I think that any real negativity toward Pat in this 2025 year has probably been a bridge too far. I think it kind of speaks to some sour grapes if you're taking significant shots at him in 2025. Maybe the Mary Kate Cornett thing would be the only blemish on his resume in 2025. with the Ole Miss, scandal that he decided to talk about on air and got sued for, or threatened a lawsuit against him. But he hasn't really stepped in it. And I think anyone who's still bashing him, it's kind of, hey, that's not really where the wind's blowing right now.
Yeah. So it was around this time last year, you had the white bitch incident with Caitlin Clark. And I remember at that point, that was when Bill Simmons, I think said something on his podcast about what are the odds that Pat's going to finish out his 5-year contract at ESPN? We're coming up on year 2 here. And I know that's not even halfway through, but if he's managed to weather calling out the people that he's called out at ESPN and managed to weather a lot of these storms, I think he's kind of cruising here. So I don't I'm not on, I will say the Up to Something season social media post did throw me for a little bit of the loop, and I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop on that. And you have the Rich Eisen thing hanging out there as well. But at this point, I agree. I think it's been pretty quiet. So I didn't want to put that one as overcovered because I felt it was properly covered.
For sure. All right. Hot mic, something that caught our attention. We liked or disliked in the world of sports media in the past week. I'll start. I don't usually start, but I don't know what yours is because we didn't talk about it. So I don't know if it's a segue or not, but I'll go with I saw the movie F1 with Brad Pitt over the weekend in IMAX. I'm lucky enough to live near a real film IMAX theater, one of the only ones in the country, and I've been trying to make use of it as much as I can, and this was the perfect movie for it. I loved the first hour or hour 15. I loved the idea of the underdog type character, Brad Pitt, actually hit the trick up his sleeve, or the thing that qualifies as the comeback being kind of shithousery, to use a soccer term, or intentionally losing or rigging the competition. That was a cool idea. And I liked other elements of the interpersonal stuff and whatever, but the second half of it was just I could have written the story, falling in love with the girl that he has eyes for at the beginning, and then zooms on his scars, and then a revelation about the accident at the beginning was worse than we thought. And it kind of borderline went into the absurdity. I had a good time. It was loud. It was shiny. It was cool to see on a big screen, but I think they could have done better. I think that there could have been an actual movie in there rather than what they did, which I kind of felt a little gross walking out of, where I was like, okay, that was an F1 commercial.
Yeah.
That's what I watched. It's cool. I'm fine with it, but it was much more that than movie.
Are you an F1 fan?
Not really.
Yeah. I heard you might like it more if you're not an F1 fan. I heard F1 fans have some larger gripes with it.
Probably. I'm sure there were technical inaccuracies and whatever, because that sport is absurdly complex. And there is a plot point that hinges upon car design regulations and the timing of when you're allowed to make changes to the vehicle and all those sorts of things that, I don't even pretend to know. And those are probably not perfect. As well as him coming. The one thing that even I noticed is I guess I shouldn't fully spoil this, but there's multiple changes to who drives on race day at the very last second throughout this movie that I cannot imagine is allowed. But whatever. It was fun. It got the job done, but it could have been a lot better. What's yours?
Our producer Phil is our racing expert, and when I said I heard F1 fans have an issue with it, he just said in our chat, "Yep." So I will.
In all caps.
Yep. So I'll take him there. So my original one was going to be Trinity Rodman and Ben Shelton's relationship. I just like having a athlete power relationship back in my life. I feel like it's been a while since our last good one, and they seem genuinely happy. So that's been fun to follow on social media.
I love that. I watched his match yesterday, and I love also the kind of eerie appearance similarities between her and Zendaya, and the fact that Challengers came out last year, and we saw a movie where there was a very similar looking thin black woman sitting in the stands watching the patter of a tennis match while her boyfriend was involved in it. I thought that was kind of funny to see. And then I liked that she clapped back and corrected that her name is not Tiffany and it's Trinity, because on the broadcast I think they said the wrong thing. So I'm here for it. I hope that he is really good really soon, because he's a superstar. Like, he's like egging on the crowd and like getting into it with the quiet Brits at Wimbledon who clearly don't even want to involve themselves. But anyway, yes, not to steal yours, but I love it. I love their thing.
Yeah, no, I'm just excited to have that sort of storyline back in my sports life. But I'll go with you inspired me to do a review as well. I'll review Quarterback season 2 on Netflix. We've talked about these shows from time to time here. I loved it. I got an early screener of it because I was planning on reviewing it. And I kind of thought, it's 7 episodes. I'll space it out throughout the week. I watched all 7 hours in 24 hours. Like I watched this I devoured this. And like, I don't really have anything profound to say about it. I think the casting was really good with Jared Goff, Joe Burrow, and Kirk Cousins. And just the contrast between 3 quarterbacks who are all at different points in their careers, different points in their personal lives, but also have some overlap as well. And also went through frustrating points of their season. But mainly it just got me like pumped for football again. It's like, this is the point of the calendar where I feel like I fall out of football and I like need to get back in to fantasy and to gambling and all that sort of stuff. And this won't like give you the answers to all of that, but this will like inspire you to like get revved up for football again. So like there's some stuff you could nitpick. Like they don't show the moment Kirk Cousins gets benched, but they do show all of the aftermath and all of the lead up to it. They avoid talking about the model who was staying at Joe Burrow's house when his house got broken into, but they do show you a lot of stuff from that, including when he found out that his house had been broken into during a game. So I really did not like Receiver. I actually had to stop watching Receiver because I found George Kittle just like that. It was way too much George Kittle. But to me, like I thought the first season of Quarterback was pretty good. I thought this was like an improvement on it. This to me was like, has replaced Hard Knocks as what I look forward to now. So hopefully it can continue summer after summer, and they can find enough quarterbacks who are willing to take part in it.
Not to get sidetracked with Receiver, which is the opposite of the praise you're giving to Quarterback, but I think I could have put the press around Tight End University on my in a bunch of different categories we have. I mean, the book tour minus the book category that I've thrown out there before. I think Windhorse got the inaugural one on our pod a few weeks back. It should maybe just be called something related to Tight End University, because I still am not even like super. I don't even have a great understanding of what it is still, because I am so allergic to watching anything about it, and there's a lot of Kittle in there as well. But yeah, Quarterback. I was surprised about the timing when they first debuted it, because I was like, July's a little early. Are people really thinking about football? But you're kind of right. Like plus not everybody's going to binge it like you. So it gives people the time to get excited, finish it right in time for training camp and everything and college starting. I think I've told you that I loved the first episode of the first season of Quarterback and then never watched any of it again. It was one of those for me. But the cast excites me much more this time around. I'm very. How does it make Burrow look? More of like a pretty boy celebrity, or more real?
I'd say more real. There's a lot of stuff in there with his family. Like he spends a lot of time with his mom and dad. There's also a really cool, because him and Jamar Chase obviously played at LSU together. And so like their families have built this like really unique bond since they stayed together with the Bengals. And there's an episode of the 6 of them like out to brunch together, just reminiscing about LSU and talking about like how they're going to be doing this for hopefully another 10 years. There's a scene where like they kind of imply that Joe Burrow's dad like is really big into the tailgating scene now that he's not coaching anymore, and like just really enjoys his Sunday tailgates. So I thought that was kind of funny. But I thought Burrow came off well. I think Jared Goff probably comes off the best, just because he's probably the quarterback in the group we don't like know anything about. And so this was like a real look at him, and he's he's an interesting guy. Like he has more personality than I think you would probably expect from somebody. And he's also had a unique career too. So, and the Cousins stuff is just, man, Kirk Cousins is a guy. That is a guy who I probably would not want to get stuck talking to at a party, but definitely a guy.
He was kind of the Goff of the first season. I
He
feel like
was.
where people were like, "Huh, this dude has a little more to him than we thought," and the wife's eccentricities and all that stuff. But yeah, Goff and Burrow, I could be sold on for sure. I think I'll check it. Like Mahomes was in the first season, but
Yeah.
I kind of know a lot about Mahomes, and he's a pretty normal dude, so it wasn't that interesting to me. His storyline. I only watched. I think I might have watched 2 episodes, but that was what drew me in, and then I got the least out of him, so that's part of why I never came back to it. But if there's a lot of Burrow that's good, I'm probably sold on it. I'll check it out.
Yeah, the best thing I can say is like, because I remember there were like some Marcus Mariota scenes that really dragged. And so the way the episodes are set up is like, they do like their theme, like, oh, this is like the quarterback's beautiful mind. These are the things they have to overcome. And it's like quick hitters. But then you spend like probably 20 minutes at a time with one quarterback. And by the time that segment ends, like you're pumped to get to Detroit, like you're pumped to go to Cincinnati and like see what those guys are up to now. And so it's like, I just think the pacing's really good. And like it just gets you excited for football. That's the best thing I can say about it.
Love it. All right, that'll wrap us up for the week. We're here for you every single Wednesday, so hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. Don't forget to check out awfulannouncing.com, where we got coverage on all of this crazy world, minute to minute, every single day, plus social media, TikTok. I'm doing the biggest sports media moments of all time 3 times a week on our TikTok feed, so just plugging that as well. And we'll have Howard Megdal on the Awful Announcing podcast coming up to fill in the gaps on our Caitlin Clark conversation a little bit more. So check all of that out, and we'll catch you next week.